So we've got some movement in the WNBA offseason, namely from a strange trade by the Chicago Sky. I'm not going to sit here and call it the worst trade I've ever seen or a disaster or anything until I see the subsequent moves, but very odd. The Sky trade some later draft picks to the Tempo and the Fire to ensure that their players are protected, meaning the Tempo and the Fire won't take any of their players in the expansion draft. But the thing is, did the Sky have a roster full of players those two teams wanted to take in the first place? It was a roster that had the worst record.
The room went cold the second the trade was finalized. Teresa Weatherspoon looked at the paperwork in total shock, realizing the Chicago Sky had just gambled away their entire future on a move that defies every law of basketball logic. This wasn't just a minor roster tweak or a simple exchange of assets. It was a baffling decision to protect a roster that finished at the absolute bottom of the standings last season. As the rest of the league prepares for the seismic shift brought on by superstars like Caitlin Clark, Chicago seems to be moving in the opposite direction. The coaching staff is now left to pick up the pieces of a strategy that feels more like a white flag than a blueprint for a championship.
Full of players those two teams wanted to take in the first place. It was a roster that had the worst record in the WNBA last season. So, stand pat. Good job. You're keeping that team intact. That's my first reaction when I see it, because it did just catch me off guard a little bit. Here are the exact details as posted by their own account. The Sky received the 2026 round 2 pick 21. In turn, Portland gets pick 17. So for that swap of 4 places in the draft, the Fire will not take anybody on the Sky's roster. Same thing here.
The specifics of the deal are enough to make any seasoned analyst do a double take. Chicago sent a 2026 second-round pick to the expansion franchises, the Portland Fire and the Golden State Tempo, just to ensure their current players wouldn't be touched in the expansion draft. On paper, trading pick 21 for pick 17 sounds like a minor swap, but the cost of that protection is what has everyone scratching their heads. They are effectively paying a premium to keep a group together that couldn't find a way to win games last year. It is a move that signals a desperate attachment to a failing core, and it has left the basketball world wondering what the front office is actually seeing behind closed doors.
About the Sky last year. And it's not exactly like she was wrong, right? Like, she wasn't wrong to say that the Sky are a crappy organization. I mean, she didn't say that directly, but that's, everybody kind of knows that the Sky are a crappy organization. But she did sort of throw her teammates under the bus in the process, which I didn't think was cool. I mean, I think there's a way to deliver the message without doing that. And Courtney Vandersloot was obviously hurt by that, who's a veteran of the league. How much did that hurt Reese's relationship with the team? There's been some friction there, it seems.
You have to look at the reality of the Sky's performance to understand why this is so controversial. Last season, they were tied for the worst record in the WNBA, and their point differential was actually worse than almost everyone else in the league. When a team performs that poorly, the standard procedure is to clean house and rebuild through the draft. Instead, the Sky are treating their roster like it is full of untouchable icons who need to be shielded at all costs. It is a level of organizational denial that is rarely seen in professional sports. If the players you are protecting led you to the cellar, why are you so afraid of losing them to an expansion team that is starting from scratch?
She did sort of throw her teammates under the bus in the process, which I didn't think was cool. I mean, I think there's a way to deliver the message without doing that. And Courtney Vandersloot was obviously hurt by that, who's a veteran of the league. How much did that hurt Reese's relationship with the team? There's been some friction there, it seems, and some tension there. Do they have, is she going to definitely be back on the Sky? I don't think you can say with certainty, even though obviously Angel's a hell of a player. But maybe that is another thing to consider with the Sky off season. I mean, I did say they put together some theme nights. Well, this is their trade again.
There is a massive logic gap here that Teresa Weatherspoon is now forced to bridge. The expansion teams, the Fire and the Tempo, are looking for foundational pieces or high upside projects. Looking at the Sky's current depth chart, it is hard to find a long list of players that an expansion team would even want to gamble on. Aside from their top tier rookies, the roster is filled with players who have struggled to find consistency. By giving up assets to protect these players, the Sky are essentially bidding against themselves. They are losing draft capital to save players that likely would have been passed over anyway, leaving the team with fewer tools to improve in the coming years.
Nights, well, this is their trade again. They put together some theme nights this year, and there's no Barbie night as one of them, which is one of the things that fans noticed when they've had Barbie nights, I think the last 2 years, and obviously that being a tie-in with Angel Reese. And then there's, the idea also that the Sky are definitely not incentivized to tank. Like, you go into this next year's draft, right? And if you're thinking about the 2027 WNBA draft, that is a loaded draft, or at least it should be a loaded draft, right? Like,
Then there is the looming shadow of the 2027 WNBA draft, which is expected to be the most talent-rich class in the history of the sport. We are talking about generational stars like Juju Watkins, Madison Booker, and Hannah Hidalgo entering the league at the same time. These are the players who will eventually challenge Caitlin Clark for the throne. However, the Chicago Sky have managed to put themselves in a position where they don't even control their own destiny for that year. Because of a previous trade with the Washington Mystics to acquire Ariel Atkins, they gave up a pick swap that could cost them a chance at a franchise-altering superstar. It is a catastrophic oversight.
Players, a much better draft next year than this year on paper, but the Sky don't control their pick because they traded a pick swap to the Washington Mystics in order to get Ariel Atkins as part of that deal. So they also don't control their pick going into next year. So I'm just trying, I'm as you see, I'm like almost talking through it in real time here. I'm trying to see what the vision is exactly for this trade, because it's either they think they've got
the Ariel Atkins trade is already being labeled as one of the worst aging deals in recent memory. Washington walked away with the number 3 overall pick in 2025 and the rights to swap picks in 2027. In exchange, Chicago got a veteran player who, while talented, hasn't been able to lift the team out of the league's basement. This pattern of overvaluing the present at the expense of the future is exactly what has the organization in a tailspin. They are constantly trying to win now with a roster that isn't equipped to do so, and the result is a mounting pile of lost draft picks and missed opportunities that will haunt the franchise for years to many come.
And the rights to swap picks in 2027. So that trade is not aging very well. It was first guessed at the time by a lot of people, to be quite honest with you. And the same thing is happening now. So you have to wonder what the motivation is behind the trade. You also have to wonder what the relationship is like with Angel Reese and the front office and the organization, because she's the face of the squad. I am also in the camp that Reese and Cardoso, I just don't think is a long-term fit. I think Angel Reese is at her best as a small ball center.
Internal tensions are only making the situation more volatile for Weatherspoon and her staff. Angel Reese, the face of the franchise, has been vocal about her frustrations with the organization in the past. While she didn't call them a crappy organization directly, the subtext of her comments was impossible to ignore. She has highlighted the lack of professional standards and the feeling that the team isn't being set up for success. This kind of public friction between a star player and the front office is a massive red flag. If your best player doesn't believe in the vision, it doesn't matter how many picks you swap or which role players you protect from expansion drafts.
Cardoso, I just don't think is a long-term fit. I think Angel Reese is at her best as a small ball center. To be quite honest, she doesn't really spread the floor, shoot the ball. I know she's working on it some, but that's not her game. I think she's at her best when you surround her with shooters and scorers. She can do the dirty work on the boards, and she's not forced into a situation where the defense is daring her to shoot the ball or beat them from the outside or anything like that. I think that's when Chicago would be at their most dangerous. But of course, that doesn't work with Cardoso either. And those are the two players they've invested.
The relationship between Angel Reese and the rest of the team is also under a microscope. Last season, Reese made comments that some interpreted as throwing her own teammates under the bus. It created a visible rift, especially with veterans like Courtney Vandersloot, who have spent years building the league's culture. This kind of locker room toxicity is exactly what a first-year coach dreads. Weatherspoon is trying to build a cohesive unit, but she's dealing with a star who feels alienated and a veteran presence that feels disrespected. It's a powder keg waiting to explode, and these puzzling trades are only adding more fuel to the fire. Even the marketing side of the franchise seems to be signaling a disconnect. Fans were quick to notice that the Sky's upcoming schedule doesn't include a Barbie night, which has been a staple for the last 2 years as a tie-in with Angel Reese's personal brand. In the modern WNBA, marketing is just as important as the on-court product, especially with the explosion of interest surrounding the league. Removing a signature event for your biggest star feels like a deliberate snub or a sign that the relationship is beyond repair. It's these small details that paint a picture of an organization that is fundamentally out of sync with its own players and its own fan base. Tactically, the roster fit is another nightmare that Weatherspoon has to solve on the fly. The investment in both Angel Reese and Camila Cardoso as the pillars of the team is a massive gamble. Both players are traditional paint dwellers who thrive near the rim, but they offer very little in terms of floor spacing or outside shooting. In a league that is increasingly dominated by perimeter play and three-point shooting, playing two non-shooters at the same time is a recipe for offensive stagnation. Defenses are already daring the Sky to beat them from the outside, and so far Chicago has no answer. It's a structural flaw that no amount of coaching can easily fix. The Sky's front office seems to be operating under the philosophy of sunk costs. They made a trade for Haley Van Lith in the draft, and rather than evaluating her based on her current production, they seem to be holding on to her simply because of what they gave up to get her. This is a classic mistake in sports management. You should always evaluate a player based on what they can provide today, not what you spent yesterday. By refusing to move on from underperforming assets, they are clogging their roster and preventing themselves from taking the necessary risks to actually improve. It's a stagnant approach in a league that is moving faster than ever. When you compare the Sky's moves to the rest of the league, the disparity is shocking. While teams like Indiana are building around the gravity of Caitlin Clark and creating modern, high-paced offenses, Chicago is doubling down on a style of play that feels 10 years behind the curve. They are sacrificing their 2026 and 2027 assets for the sake of continuity, but continuity only works if you have a winning formula. The Sky are essentially choosing to stay bad rather than taking a chance on being great. It's a defensive, fearful way to run a basketball team, and it's predictably resulting in a product that fans are starting to lose patience with. The expansion draft protection move is particularly galling because of how little leverage the expansion teams actually had. The Fire and the Tempo are desperate for talent, but they aren't going to waste their picks on players who don't fit their long-term vision. Chicago could have likely kept their core intact without giving up a single draft pick if they had just played their cards right. Instead, they panicked and handed over valuable draft positioning for a guarantee they might not have even needed. It shows a lack of confidence in their own scouting and a complete misunderstanding of the league's current power dynamics. Teresa Weatherspoon is now in a position where she has to perform a miracle. She is a legendary figure in the game, known for her toughness and her basketball IQ, but even she can't overcome a front office that consistently shoots itself in the foot. Every time she tries to take a step forward with the development of Reese or Cardoso, a new trade or a lost draft pick sets the franchise back 2 steps. The frustration in her eyes during recent interviews is palpable. She knows that in the era of Caitlin Clark, there is no room for error. If you aren't getting better, you are rapidly becoming irrelevant. There is also the question of whether the Sky are even incentivized to win right now. Usually a team this bad would be looking to tank for a top pick, but since they don't even control their own picks in the upcoming legendary drafts, tanking does them no good. They are stuck in the worst possible place in professional sports, the middle of the bottom. They aren't good enough to compete for a playoff spot, and they aren't positioned to benefit from being bad. It is a total organizational failure that has left the players confused and the coaching staff exhausted. The brain trust in Chicago seems to have no clear exit strategy. The ripple effect of these moves will be felt across the entire WNBA. When a major market team like Chicago struggles this much, it affects the league's overall health and competitive balance. Agents and free agents are watching this chaos unfold, and it's becoming increasingly unlikely that top-tier talent will want to sign with the Sky in the future. Why would a star player choose Chicago when they can see the front office consistently mismanaging assets and failing to support their best players? The Sky are building a reputation as a franchise where careers go to stall, and that is a label that is incredibly hard to wash off. We are seeing a real-time erosion of the Sky's identity. They used to be a team defined by grit and veteran leadership, but that has been replaced by a sense of aimless wandering. The trade to protect the roster is the ultimate symbol of this new era. It's a move made out of fear of loss rather than a desire for growth. In the high-stakes world of professional basketball, fear is a silent killer. If you are too afraid to lose a rotation player, you will never be bold enough to acquire a superstar. Chicago is playing a small game while the rest of the league is thinking bigger than they ever have before. The tension between Angel Reese and the organization is the ticking time bomb that could end this entire experiment. Reese is a generational personality with a massive following, and she understands her own value. She isn't going to sit quietly while the team around her is mismanaged into the ground. If she decides she wants out, the Sky will have virtually no leverage left. They have already traded away their future picks, meaning they can't even execute a proper rebuild if their star demands a trade. They have backed themselves into a corner with no obvious way out, and the walls are closing in fast. Every move the Sky make is now being compared to the success of other rebuilding teams. When you see how quickly other franchises have turned things around by making smart, forward-thinking trades, Chicago's ineptitude becomes even more glaring. They had the chance to be a powerhouse in the post-Caitlin Clark explosion, but they are wasting the opportunity on short-sighted deals and internal squabbles. The fans in Chicago deserve better than a team that is constantly making excuses for why they can't compete. The city has a rich basketball history, but the current state of the Sky is a far cry from those championship glory days. The draft pick swap at 17 and 21 might seem small, but in the grand scheme of things, it represents a total lack of valuation for developmental talent. Those mid-round picks are where savvy teams find the role players who round out a championship roster. By tossing them away like they don't matter, Chicago is effectively saying they don't trust their own ability to scout and develop talent. It is an admission of weakness that rival GMs are surely noticing. In a league where every roster spot is precious, throwing away draft capital is a luxury that a bottom-tier team simply cannot afford. Looking ahead, the road for the Chicago Sky looks incredibly bleak. They have a roster that doesn't fit, a star who is unhappy, and a front office that is allergic to long-term planning. Teresa Weatherspoon is doing her best to maintain a positive face for the media, but the reality of the situation is written all over the team's transactions. They are a franchise in crisis, pretending that everything is fine while the ship is taking on water. Unless there is a fundamental shift in how they value their assets and their players, they are headed for a period of prolonged irrelevance that will be painful to watch. The move to protect the roster from the fire and the tempo will likely go down as the moment the Sky officially lost the plot. It was a trade that served no strategic purpose other than to maintain a status quo that wasn't working in the first place. As the 2026 and 2027 seasons approach, the full weight of these decisions will finally be felt. The Sky will be watching from the sidelines as other teams draft the superstars of tomorrow, all because they were too afraid to let go of a roster that couldn't even win a third of its games. It is a tragedy of errors that has no easy solution. Ultimately, the Chicago Sky are a cautionary tale for the rest of the WNBA. In an era of unprecedented growth and competition, you cannot afford to be stagnant or delusional about your own talent. The game is moving forward, with or without you, and right now, Chicago is being left behind. Teresa Weatherspoon's shock is shared by everyone who follows the sport, as we all watch a franchise struggle to find its footing in a rapidly changing world. The future belongs to the bold, the strategic, and the modern. Unfortunately for the fans in the Windy City, the Sky currently possess none of those qualities.